Who do you think you are, holding my son like that? The billionaire's voice thundered as he slammed the papers onto the table, eyes burning with fury. That one question shattered the fragile silence inside the mansion and set off a storm that would change every life within its walls. What could a young maid, burdened by her own past, possibly mean to a man obsessed with control, and to a boy who had forgotten how to smile? Stay with this story, because every choice from here on carves a path between betrayal, redemption, and the meaning of family. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Ravenwood Hills sits where the fog from San Francisco loosens its grip, and the sun remembers how to be warm. On the highest slope, the Crane place looks out over vines in tidy rows, stone walls, dark windows, a driveway that curves like a question. It's handsome, sure. It's also quiet in a way that keeps its own counsel. Amara Holt wakes before the sprinklers. She ties her hair back, pulls on soft-soled shoes, and crosses the service yard with a mug that smells like diner coffee. 27, light on money, heavy on promises. She works here to shave down debt and keep moving. She once studied nursing. Then her mother got sick, bills doubled overnight, and school slipped through her fingers. The part she doesn't say out loud. She's terrified of standing by while someone hurts and not having a thing in her hands to fix it. Her room sits over the laundry. Small, neat, a shoebox with a window toward the vines. By 7, she's in the big kitchen, checking the breakfast tray the cook left cooling. Toast points, scrambled eggs, apples sliced thin. The boy likes them that way. Lucian Crane is 9 and runs his world from a chair with rubber tires. He doesn't complain about the chair. He complains about silence. When Amara wheels him onto the veranda, the morning smells like cut grass and lemon oil, and the light puts a thin gold rim on everything. She reads to him from a dog-eared space book, makes rocket noises, slips in bad jokes until he snorts. When his hands tremble, she steadies the cup. When his eyes go shiny, she leans close so he can borrow her calm. It happens fast, too much noise, too much air. His breath goes shallow, chest tight, the small cough he hates. Hey, she says gentle. Count with me. In through your nose, slow it down. He freezes, then folds into her, small and fierce. She wraps him up without thinking, palm wide between his shoulder blades, a rhythm he trusts. The moment softens. The tightness lets go. A throat clears behind them. Victor Hale, the butler with keys to everything, stands in the doorway. He's polished as the silver he inventories, a man who believes in rules, because rules keep doors shut. His eyes narrow a fraction. Miss Holt, he says, smooth as glass. The young master's schedule is quite full. We wouldn't want him overtired. I was helping him breathe. She answers. No heat. No apology. He glances at her hand still on the boy's back, then steps away. By dusk, the wind shifts and the drive lights blink on. A black town car noses up the curve. Balthazar Crane, tailored, tired, jaw set, walks in without the sound of hurry, but with all the weight of it. Papers under his arm. A phone that won't stop humming. Victor falls in beside him like a shadow that learned how to talk. Sir, he murmurs, low and careful, you may wish to keep an eye on how the new maid handles the boy. The evening in Ravenwood Hills had that hush that comes after gardeners put away their tools, when the vineyard below turns purple in the last light. Inside the Crane estate, shadows settled heavy against the paneled walls. Amara sat in the library with Lucian, the boy pale and shaking after a spasm that had left him frightened and breathless. She bent close, murmuring steady words, one hand wrapped firmly around his small shoulders. His tears dampened her sleeve. The door opened with no warning. Balthazar Crane stepped in, his tall frame filling the doorway, a stack of contracts still in one hand. He had come straight from San Francisco, irritation clinging to him like a second skin. His eyes caught on the sight before him. His son folded against the chest of the young woman he barely knew, her arms holding him like she had every right. The sound that broke from him was not loud, but sharp enough to cut. The papers hit the desk with a slap. What the hell do you think you're doing? His voice cracked through the still air. Amara turned, startled, but she kept her hand on Lucien's back. "He was struggling to breathe," she said, her tone calm, almost pleading. "I was helping him through the episode." Balthazar's jaw tightened, disbelief carved into the lines of his face. "You think it's your place to touch him like that? To hold him as if you're family? You are not family, Miss Hope. You're here to work, nothing more." Lucien's hands clutched at Amara's blouse. "Dad, please," he stammered, his voice breaking. "Don't be mad at her. She helps me. She knows how to make it stop hurting." Balthazar cut him off with a raised hand, eyes still pinned on Amara. "Pack your things. Tonight, you won't spend another hour under this roof." The boy's wail filled the room, raw and desperate. "No, please don't. She's the only one who listens to me. She's the only one who makes me feel like I'm not broken." His small fist beat against the arms of his wheelchair, as if he could change his father's mind by sheer force of will. For the briefest moment, Balthazar's gaze flickered, something uncertain, almost shaken, as though his son's words found a chink in the armor he wore. But then it vanished. He reached down, spun the chair, and began wheeling Lucien toward the hallway, his movements clipped and final. The boy cried harder, twisting in the seat to reach for Amara. She stayed frozen where she stood, her throat tight, her body numb with shock. One moment she had been calming a child's terror. The next she was marked as an intruder. The slam of the library door left her staring at the empty space, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Behind her, near the archway, Victor Hale lingered just long enough to let his expression slip. The corner of his mouth curved, satisfaction thin as a knife blade. He had seen exactly what he wanted. Proof to whisper, proof to feed suspicion. Then he disappeared into hall, silent as a shadow. The consequences came faster than she expected. By the following afternoon, a headline crept to the local tabloid that thrived on scandal. "Young Maid grows too close to Crane Air." No names, no photos, but enough hints for neighbors to wag their heads at the market and speculate over their coffee. Amara learned of it in the kitchen, where the cook slid the paper across the counter with an apologetic frown. Her cheeks burned as she read, the words blurring. She had thought shame was something she'd buried back in her mother's sick room, but it rose fresh and hot now. That night she sat on the narrow bed in the servants' quarters, her old suitcase half open on the floor. She folded clothes she had washed 100 times, the fabric thin, the colors faded. The lamp threw a tired yellow glow, and outside the crickets buzzed with indifferent rhythm. Every sound reminded her that she didn't belong here. Not really. In the main house, Lucien cried himself to sleep. The nurse tried to soothe him, but his sobs drifted down the hall, muffled behind heavy doors. On the balcony above the vineyard, Balthazar stood with a glass of scotch. He looked out over the vines, but his gaze kept dropping to the pool of light from the servant's wing. From this distance, he could almost see the outline of her sitting alone. His grip tightened on the glass until it cut crystal bit into his palm. Doubt pressed in, but he shoved it down. What he had seen looked wrong, felt wrong. Still, the sound of his son's pleading wouldn't leave him. The mornings inside the Crane estate had once carried a rhythm of routine. Lucien's careful breakfast, the soft shuffle of therapists, the sound of Amara reading in a low voice. Now there was silence. Plates came back to the kitchen untouched. The nurse tried coaxing him into stretches, but Lucien sat stiff in his wheelchair, lips pressed tight, eyes fixed on the window. Balthazar noticed every refusal. He stood at the threshold of his son's room one morning, tie loosened, the weight of another restless night still on his face. "Lucien," he said quietly, "you need to eat. You need your exercises if you want your legs stronger. I don't want you falling behind." The boy looked up only long enough to give him a stare, so hollow it startled him. No anger, no spark, just distance. Then he turned his face back toward the glass, watching the vineyard slope as though the vines could give him answers his father never could. Balthazar's chest tightened. He told himself this was necessary, that boundaries mattered. Yet when he heard the echo of his son's words, "She's the only one who makes me feel like I'm not broken," they burned hotter than the liquor he poured at night. Meanwhile, Amara walked through Ravenwood Hills with no real direction. She had gathered her things, but hadn't gone far. A friend at Moonlight Cafe gave her a shift bussing tables, enough to cover a cheap motel if she could stretch her tips. Still, each time she passed rows of houses leading back to the Crane estate, something inside pulled. She wanted to keep walking, to be free of the humiliation. Yet Lucien's face, his desperate clutch at her sleeve, haunted every step. She sat in the cafe's back room one afternoon, tying her apron, when the bell above the door jingled louder than usual. Murmurs rolled through the small crowd. Amara turned, and her heart stopped. Lucien, pale but determined, maneuvered his motorized wheelchair over the threshold. His hair was windswept, his hands shaking with effort on the joystick, but his eyes were locked on her. Miss Amara, his voice cracked, raw with relief. I found you. The cafe froze. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Coffee mugs hovered midair. Amara rushed forward, her hands instinctively reaching for him. Lucien, what are you doing here? How did you get all this way? He nearly toppled forward as she knelt and gathered him close, his small body trembling from a strain. I had to see you, he whispered into her shoulder. I can't stand it without you. Tears stung her eyes. She smoothed his hair, half scolding, half cradling. You scared me half to death. You can't just run off like this. Sweetheart, do you know how dangerous that was? But his grip only tightened. I don't care. I just need you. The sight was tender. Yet already she sensed eyes on them, judgment forming in the quiet gossip of strangers. And she was right. By evening, whispers traveled faster than facts. Another headline appeared. Disabled Crane air scene clinging to former Maid. The cruelty of it made her stomach twist. Victor Hale wasted no time. Standing in the study with the newspaper in hand, he placed it before Balthazar with deliberate precision. Sir, this is exactly the risk I warned you of. The optics are damning. If she remains anywhere near the boy, the world will read it as scandal. Balthazar said nothing, but the muscle in his jaw ticked. The photograph inside was grainy but unmistakable. Amara leaning close to Lucien in the library days earlier, his hand curled around hers. That night, Amara learned how the picture had surfaced. A dishwasher from the estate had boasted at the cafe. His phone pulled out to show the original image. Someone had paid him to leak it, and though he didn't say who, Amara felt the certainty in her bones. This hadn't been random. Someone wanted her gone for good. Later, with Lucien drowsy against her side, she wheeled him back up the long drive toward the mansion. Her chest ached with dread, but she couldn't keep him away. Not when he needed his father's roof, his father's protection. They reached the front steps as the lights of the big house flickered on. She stood there, one hand on the chair, her heart pounding. Through the tall windows she could see Balthazar in the parlor. Drink in hand, his silhouette stark against the glow. Lucien looked up at her, eyes wide, what with the kind of fear children aren't supposed to carry. You won't leave me again, will you? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. Amara swallowed hard, tore between pride and love. She had come here intending to let go, to hand him back and walk away. But staring into those eyes, she knew what would happen if she did. The boy would sink into silence, and the world would grow darker around him. The heavy doors of the Crane estate swung open just as Amara pushed Lucien's wheelchair into the foyer. The boy's face was flushed from the long ride back, but he clung to her hand, unwilling to let go. Balthazar stood at the foot of the staircase, jacket still buttoned, as if he hadn't shed the armor of the business day. His expression froze into something sharp and cutting. In 2 strides he was on them, his voice rising in a tone that carried through the marble hall. What the hell is this? He barked. Do you think dragging him back here proves anything? You're exploiting a sick child to keep your place under this roof. Amara flinched at the words, but she didn't loosen her hold on Lucien. Her chest burned, but her voice stayed steady. I don't need this job, Mr. Crane. I don't need your money or your house. But he needs me. That's the only reason I'm here. Lucien spun the wheels of his chair forward until he was wedged between them, his small voice breaking into a shout. If she goes, I won't talk to you anymore, Dad. Not one word. The silence that followed landed like a hammer. Balthazar's breath caught, and for a moment his composure cracked. Those words sliced into a fear he never admitted aloud, the possibility that his son would turn away from him forever. He stared down at the boy's trembling face, and then at Amara's steady, defiant eyes. His heart gave a painful twist, but his pride refused to bend. By the next morning, the estate was surrounded. Reporters parked at the gates of Ravenwood Hills, cameras ready, hungry for scraps of scandal. Headlines already screamed across cheap papers and online gossip blogs. The Crane name, so carefully cultivated in boardrooms and charity galas, was suddenly being dragged through the mud. Billionaire heir clings to former maid. Family in crisis behind mansion walls. Victor Hale hovered close to his employer, whispering poison in calm, measured tones. This is untenable, sir. If you let her stay, the story grows. Investors notice. Stockholders panic. She is a liability you can't afford. Balthazar paced his study, glass of whiskey untouched on the desk. He could almost hear his father's voice, cold and exacting. Protect the empire at any cost. Yet, when he glanced through the glass doors toward the garden, he caught sight of Lucien and Amara on the terrace. The boy was laughing, just once, at something she whispered. The sound was so rare it struck him like a blade, because it wasn't for him. Lucien had become the unwilling bridge in battleground both, caught between the two people who claimed to want the best for him. To his father, he was heir and only son. To Amara, he was a fragile boy who deserved more than silence and pity. And in that tug-of-war, the child himself was fraying. Then came the letter. A plain envelope slipped through the gate one late afternoon. No return address. Just a crane crest scrawled in ink as though mocking the family's pride. Inside, a single sheet. She is not just a maid. Ask about her past, and you will see why she clings so tightly to your house. The truth is not what you think. Balthazar read the words twice, his stomach twisting. It wasn't proof of anything, but it was enough to stir the old suspicion, the guarded instinct that everyone wanted something from him. He set the letter down with a scowl, but the seeds had been planted. That night, Amara sat alone in her tiny rented room above the cafe, the silence pressing down heavier than the mansion's stone walls ever had. She pulled a battered shoebox from beneath her bed. Inside were papers she rarely touched. Old tuition bills, receipts from hospitals, and a certificate that proved she had once been on her way to becoming a nurse before life had ripped the chance away. Her fingers lingered on the folded withdrawal form from the nursing program, the line where her signature had wavered after the doctor's words about her mother's illness. She whispered into the still air, "If they see this, if they dig through who I was and what I couldn't finish, will they ever believe I'm here for him, not for myself?" The mahogany table at Crane Dominion's headquarters gleamed under the recessed lights, but the mood around it was anything but polished. A cluster of shareholders leaned forward, murmuring among themselves, the words made, and scandal slipping through clenched jaws. Balthazar sat at the head of the table, his jaw set like stone, listening to one investor after another question his judgment. "Balthazar, perception is everything," one man said, his tie hanging loose as though the meeting had drained him. "This story about your son and the maid, it's unsettling. If it grows, it could erode confidence." Another leaned back, arms folded. "Investors don't like uncertainty. We don't care if it's true or not. What matters is the headline." Balthazar's hand tightened around his pen until it nearly snapped. He kept his face neutral, but inside, the words coiled like a snake. When the meeting adjourned, he left without a handshake or a word of thanks, his driver hurrying to keep pace. By the time he returned to Ravenwood Hills, the fury had curdled into something sharp and poisonous. He stormed through the doors and found Amara in the drawing room, reading quietly with Lucien. "This ends now," he thundered, slamming a hand against the doorframe. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've dragged this family's name through filth. Every paper, every investor, my entire legacy is being questioned because of you." Amara set the book aside slowly, rising to her feet. She met his rage with calm defiance. "I didn't spread those lies, Mr. Crane. Someone wants to divide you and your son. You're too proud to see it." His eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare lecture me." Victor Hale appeared as though summoned, his voice smooth as silk, but edged with venom. Sir, with respect, she's an outsider. Outsiders always bring trouble. If you cut her loose once and for all, this noise will die down. Amara turned toward Victor, her voice low but steady. And you'd know about trouble, wouldn't you? Funny how these rumors started only after you decided I didn't belong here. Victor's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flashed. I only protect a Crane name. The words barely left his mouth before Lucien jolted forward, his body convulsing in a sudden violent tremor. His wheelchair shuddered as his small frame twisted, his hands clenching. "Dad, help!" he gasped before his voice broke off. Balthazar froze, his face drained of color. For all his power, all his money, he stood paralyzed in his own home. Amara pushed past him, dropping to her knees. "Lucien, I've got you. Breathe with me, sweetheart." She slid her hand under his neck, loosening his shirt collar, counting each second with practiced precision. 1, 2, 3, just follow my voice. The episode lasted only a minute, but to Balthazar it stretched into an eternity. When Lucien finally stilled, Amara brushed damp hair off his forehead, her hands shaking only once she knew he was safe. "You should have called the doctor," Balthazar muttered, though his voice trembled. Amara shot him a look that cut deeper than words. "If I hadn't been here, your son might not have come out of this safely. You think reputation is all that matters? What about the boy you keep using as a shield against shame?" The silence in the room was suffocating. Balthazar's face hardened again, the moment of weakness swallowed by pride. "Don't mistake necessity for approval. You're still not wanted here." Her heart ached, but she lifted her chin. In that instant, she understood this was no longer about her employment. It was about Lucien's right to be seen, cared for, and defended, even if his father chose to stay blind. Later that evening, the estate's iron gates creaked open just enough for a shadowy figure to slip an envelope through. One of the guards found it and carried it upstairs to Balthazar. Inside were glossy photographs. Amara and Lucien in Pinecrest Park, the boy's head tilted against her shoulder, both of them caught in an unguarded moment of warmth. The morning after photographs appeared, Amara slipped into the back booth of a small diner on the edge of town. The smell of coffee and bacon clung to the air, but she barely tasted the cup she held. On the other end of the phone was a familiar voice, an old classmate from her nursing program, who now worked at the county hospital. "Can you do me a favor?" Amara asked quietly, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug. "Check if anyone's been asking questions about me. My records, my mom's old bills, anything." Her friend hesitated. "That's a strange request, Amara." "Why?" "Because someone's digging," she whispered. "And if they twist what they find, it could ruin everything." She ended the call quickly, slided her phone into her bag. But as she stood, she felt the prickle of eyes on her. Later that afternoon, back at the estate, Victor Hale cornered her in the hallway. "I saw you skulking around with your phone," he said, his tone as smooth as it was poisonous. "Secrets don't stay buried forever." Amara froze. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but Mr. Crane will," Victor murmured, leaning closer. "He'll know you've got something to hide." That night, Balthazar confronted her in his study, his voice low, tired, but edged with suspicion. "What are you keeping from me, Amara?" "Victor says you've been making secret calls." Her chest tightened. "I was reaching out to a friend. That's all. You can believe him if you want, but you saw what happened with Lucien. You know I'm not here for myself." For the briefest moment, his eyes softened, as though recalling her steady hands on his son during the seizure. But he turned away, gripping the edge of his desk like it was the only solid thing in the room. "I don't know what to believe anymore." The house slept uneasily that night. Just past midnight, the sharp crack of glass breaking echoed through courtyard. Within minutes, smoke curled from the old storage shed behind the gardens. Staff rushed with buckets. The groundskeeper spraying the blaze with a hose until the flames hissed out. The damage was contained, but the sight of charred wood and blackened grass sent whispers flying. By dawn, the police were at the gates, their cars casting blue light against the stone walls. An officer with a notepad questioned staff one by one. When it was Amara's turn, he asked flatly, "You were seen walking past the shed earlier. Can you explain what you were doing there?" Her stomach dropped. I was taking laundry back to the servants' quarters. That's all. I didn't start the fire. The officer jotted something down, unconvinced. Rumor swelled like a tide outside the gates. The trouble made, the suspicious fire, the scandal only growing hotter. Inside, the tension snapped. Victor seized a moment, speaking with false calm. Sir, this is exactly what I warned you about. The girl is reckless. She's dangerous. Lucien wheeled forward, his small voice rising into a desperate cry. Stop blaming her. She didn't do this. If you don't believe her, Dad, then I don't want to live here anymore. The words cut through the room like shattered glass. Everyone fell silent. Balthazar stared at his son, at the trembling hands gripping the armrest of the chair, at the fierce defiance in eyes that had once only looked at him with fear. Lucien, he began, but the boy shook his head, tears brimming. No, if you push her away, you're pushing me away too. Amara stood behind Lucien, exhausted, her face pale but her gaze unbroken. She had nothing left to prove, nothing left to say. Her very presence seemed to challenge Balthazar. Trust me or lose him. For the first time, the billionaire faltered. His shoulders sagged, the certainty in his voice dissolving into something unsteady. I need time to think. From the shadows of the corridor, Victor Hale lingered, unseen but listening. A thin smile crept across his face. The fire hadn't destroyed the shed, but had nearly destroyed Amara. And to him, that was progress. The air in Ravenwood's working-class quarters smelled faintly of grease and damp concrete. Amara sat on the edge of a sagging mattress in a rented room, staring at the peeling wallpaper as if it held an answer. The silence was loud, broken only by the hum of a flickering street lamp outside her window. She had been suspended indefinitely from the Crane estate, told to take time away until things cleared. It wasn't a dismissal, not officially, but it felt exactly like one. She thought of the boy she had left behind. The way Lucien's hands had clutched the wheels of his chair, his voice breaking as he defended her. The memory was both balm and torment. For the second time in her life, she was cast out, marked as suspect, standing alone with no safety net. Her phone buzzed. It was a friend she had contacted at the hospital. Amara, I don't know how to say this, but someone came asking about your student file. They used Crane Dominion's name, said it was routine verification. But the way they pressed, it didn't feel right. It wasn't a reporter. It was someone inside. Amara closed her eyes, pressing her fingers to her temple. So this isn't just gossip, she murmured. It's a setup. They want me gone, no matter the cost. Later that evening, a knock rattled her flimsy door. She hesitated, expecting a landlord or maybe trouble, but when she opened it, Lucien was there, his small figure lit by the dull hallway bulb. He was seated in his motorized chair, with one of the estate's drivers, an older man with kind eyes, standing just behind him. Lucien, Amara gasped, kneeling quickly. What are you doing here? You shouldn't. I had to come, he cut her off, his voice trembling but firm. They don't listen to me back home. But you do. Please don't leave me. The boy's eyes were red-rimmed, his lip trembling in that way she had come to recognize when fear outweighed courage. She wrapped her arms gently around him, feeling the thin frame under his sweatshirt. You should be in bed, she whispered, but her throat burned. I can't sleep, Lucien said, pulling back just enough to look at her. If you go, I'll have no one. You're the only one who makes me feel like I'm not broken. The words pierced her. Amara's mind reeled with warnings. Victor's smirk, Balthazar's suspicion, the anonymous letter hinting at her past. If she returned, she could hand her enemies the very weapon they needed to destroy her and the boy both. But looking into Lucien's face, she knew leaving meant abandoning him to silence, to loneliness she understood all too well. Lucien, she said slowly, steadying her voice, what if stay makes things worse for you? What if I'm the reason they keep hurting you? I don't care, he cried, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. I'd rather have you in the trouble than be without you at all. For a long moment, she had no words. She could only brush his hair back, fighting her own tears. The driver cleared his throat quietly. Miss Holt, I'll get him back before dawn. He just needed to see you. When they left, the room felt even emptier than before. Amara paced, hugging herself. Every step carried the weight of a choice she couldn't make. She wanted to fight, to stay by Lucian's side, to prove Victor wrong. But a small voice inside whispered of her mother's final days, the helplessness, the shame of having nothing to give, no way to save. Was she about to repeat that same fate, dragging Lucian into the wreckage of her past? Near midnight, she finally sat by the narrow window, the city's glow seeping in through thin curtains. She opened a worn envelope she always carried, the one with her mother's picture, the same one she used to hold as a girl when she was scared. The face smiled back at her, kind and tired. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I don't know if I can do this again. Do I run like before, or do I stand and risk losing everything?" The boardroom at Crane Dominion was suffocating. A dozen shareholders sat around the long mahogany table, their voices sharp, their eyes cutting into Balthazar like knives. One of them leaned forward, tapping his gold pen against a notepad. "For Maid, Balthazar, you're letting a maid turn this company into a laughingstock. Do you understand what's being said out there? Our stock price is wavering because of you." Balthazar sat stiffly in his chair, jaw tight. He wanted to shout that this had nothing to do with the company, that his family's private life should not be a matter of profit and loss. But the truth was clear. His empire was shaking, and it was his son's name, his family's name, now dragged across the tabloids. Victor Hale chose that moment to strike. Calm as ever, he slid a thick envelope across the polished surface. "You may want to see this, sir. It's better you hear it here, behind closed doors, than out in the open." Balthazar opened it. His face hardened as he pulled out photographs, grainy shots of Amara in her early 20s, carrying trays and a smoky bar, wearing the kind of uniform that left little to the imagination. The captions scrawled in bold ink suggested more than they showed. Victor's voice was smooth as oil. "I don't like to say I told you so, but people will believe what they want to believe. A woman like that, attached to your son, it won't end well." Balthazar shoved the photos back into the envelope, his hands trembling. He hated the images, not because of what they showed, but because of what they implied. They reduced Amara to a caricature, stripping her of dignity. And yet, part of him wondered, what if the board was right? What if allowing her near Lucian would ruin everything he had built? Outside the boardroom, the storm had already broken. Tabloids ran headlines with relish. From barmaid to billionaire's mansion, who is Amara Holt? Television pundits laughed, painting her as an opportunist. Even the most sympathetic outlets describe her as controversial. At Ravenwood Hills, Lucian's health reflected the chaos. He ate less, slept less, his small frame thinning by the day. Balthazar saw it, but every time he walked into the boys' room, Lucian turned away. His son's rejection was like salt in an open wound, and still, pride chained his words. Meanwhile, Amara sat at the cafe where she picked up shifts, listening to her friend Marcy, a nurse who had been with her since college. "Honey, you've got to go," Marcy urged, squeezing her hand across the table. "This place is poison. Start fresh somewhere new. You don't owe that man or his house a thing." Amara shook her head. "Maybe I don't owe him, but I owe Lucian. If I leave now, I'm leaving him to drown. I can't do that to him." "You'll destroy yourself trying to save that boy," Marcy warned. "And if Crane's people dig deeper into your past, you won't have a future to stand on." Amara wanted to argue, but the truth lingered like smoke. She carried scars from her choices. The dropped classes, the job she had taken to pay bills, the way people looked at her and saw only what was convenient to believe. Yet when she closed her eyes, she saw Lucian calling her name, clinging to her hand. That vision mattered more than any headline. Days later, fate handed her a revelation. She was at the hospital, dropping off paperwork for a volunteer shift she used to cover. In the lobby, a man brushed past, his coat pocket bursting open. A thick file slipped out and scattered across the linoleum floor. Amara bent down instinctively. When she gathered the pages, her breath caught. It was Lucian's medical file. Confidential, stamped with the Crane seal. "Excuse me," she said. handing it back. But then she looked up. It wasn't just any staff member. It was one of Victor Hale's trusted aides, a man she had seen at Ravenwood countless times. His eyes flickered with panic before he snatched the file, muttered thanks, and hurried off. Amara stood frozen, her pulse racing. It wasn't an accident. That file shouldn't have been outside the estate. Victor's reach stretched far deeper than she had realized. Into hospitals, into records, into every corner where secrets could be twisted into weapons. That night, alone in her small room, Amara clutched the memory of what she had seen. Her fingers dug into the worn table, her breath coming in steady waves. She looked out the window, past the dim streetlights, and into the distance where the mansion loomed like a fortress. Fear still clawed at her, but beneath it was a fire she hadn't felt in years. "No more running," she whispered, gripping the edge of Lucien's file folder she had managed to copy before handing the rest back. "If I want to protect him, I have to face the shadows head-on." Amara stood at the edge of the gravel driveway, staring up at the looming gates of Ravenwood Hills. The envelope pressed against her chest felt heavier than any weight she had ever carried. Inside were the copied medical records, proof that Victor Hale had dipped his hands where he should never have been. Yet fear gnawed at her. If she showed this to Balthazar, would he believe her? Or would he accuse her of stealing what never belonged to her? Her mind circled the same thought. I could walk away right now. Disappear before the storm swallows me whole. But then she saw Lucien's face in her memory, pale and desperate, begging her not to abandon him. That was what brought her feet forward, step by step, until she reached the heavy front doors. Inside the mansion, tension buzzed like electricity. Balthazar had hardly slept. Every newspaper headline, every email from his board reminded him that his world was unraveling. Investors demanded answers, and all of them pointed back to one name, Amara. He rubbed his temples, torn between the loyalty he felt toward Victor, who had been at his side for decades, and the sharp, undeniable ache in his chest whenever he thought of losing Lucien's trust. Outside, reporters camped at the gates, their cameras flashing day and night. Online, the story spread like fire. One viral clip showed Amara hugging Lucien, but it had been spliced and twisted into something sordid. The comments were cruel. She's playing a long game. Everyone knows her type. The narrative was being written without her voice, and she had no way to stop it. When the storm broke that evening, it was both literal and figurative. Rain lashed against the tall windows, thunder rumbling low across the hills. The summons came. Amara was to report to the drawing room. She walked in to find Balthazar standing near the hearth, his broad frame shadowed by firelight. Victor sat comfortably in a leather chair, a glass of brandy in hand, his eyes glittering with satisfaction. Balthazar's voice cut through the silence. "Since the day you stepped into this house, there's been nothing but turmoil. My name dragged to the mud, my son turned against me, my company ridiculed. Tell me, Amara, why is it that trouble follows you everywhere you go?" Her knees trembled, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Because someone wants you to believe it does." Victor gave a small, amused laugh. "How convenient. Blame a ghost instead of owning your truth." Amara's hand shook as she pulled the envelope from her coat. "This isn't about me. It's about Lucien. Ask yourself why his private medical records ended up in places they never should have been. Ask yourself who had access." She held the file out toward Balthazar, her voice breaking but steady. "The traitor isn't standing here in front of you. It's standing beside you." The crackle of the fire filled the pause. Balthazar didn't reach for the envelope. He stared at it as though it might burn him. Victor set down his glass slowly, his expression calm. Too calm. That's quite an accusation. Are we really going to indulge the word of a girl who once worked tables in a bar? A girl who conveniently always has just enough drama to keep herself relevant? Amara flinched at the cruelty, but she didn't back down. "I don't care what you say about me, but I won't let you keep using Lucien as a pawn. He deserves better than lies." Balthazar's mask cracked. The thunder outside rolled, and he glanced between Victor and Amara, his face pale, his breath uneven. The loyalty of years tugged him one way, but the memory of Lucien's frail body and pleading eyes pulled him the other. Victor leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. His voice was calm, but his eyes flashed like steel. She's desperate, Balthazar. Desperate people will say anything to survive. Don't let her drive a wedge where loyalty should stand. A silence followed, heavy enough to choke on. Amara stood drenched in the rain, her hair clinging to her cheeks, clutching the envelope as if it were her last offense. Balthazar did not speak. His eyes stayed locked on hers, searching, doubting, yearning to believe. Victor's smile was thin, controlled, but in the depths of his gaze burned something darker, a flicker of cold fury, the look of a man whose schemes had been threatened. The night was thick with quiet when the first alarm shrieked through Ravenwood Hills. A blinding red light blinked across the walls, and within seconds a smell of smoke rolled through the corridors. Down in the garage wing, flames roared to life with a fury no one had expected. Balthazar burst from his study, his voice thunderous as he called for staff. "Get everyone out. Now!" Panic scattered to the halls, servants running in different directions. Amid the chaos, one scream cut sharper than all the rest, Lucian's. His son was trapped upstairs. Amara had been on the opposite end of the corridor when she realized what was happening. A maid shouted that Lucian's wheelchair had shorted out, leaving him stranded. Without a pause, without a second thought, Amara sprinted into the smoke. Hands tried to hold her back. "You'll kill yourself," someone cried. She shook them off. "He's alone in there." The hall grew hotter with every step, the air clawing at her throat. Flames licked the door frames, swallowing the curtains in a blaze of orange. She pressed a wet cloth over her nose, but it did little to ease a burn in her lungs. "Lucian!" she yelled, her voice hoarse. "Amara!" came the small, terrified cry from his room. She shoved the door open and nearly buckled from the wave of smoke. Lucian sat rigid in his chair, tears cutting clean tracks down his soot-stained cheeks. "I can't move," he choked. Amara dropped to her knees beside him. "You're not staying here. Not tonight." She pulled the blanket from his bed, soaked in the basin by the window, and wrapped it tight around him. Then she lifted him, pressing his frail body against her chest, her arms locking him in as if nothing on earth could tear him away. The hall outside had become an inferno. Flames curled overhead, beams cracked, and the very air seemed alive with rage. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but she lowered her head, covered Lucian's face, and pushed forward. Step by step, she forced her way through. Sparks rained down, landing hot on her shoulders. Her skin stung, her legs trembled, but she clutched Lucian tighter. "Hold on to me," she whispered, her voice steady even as fear clawed at her ribs. "I've got you." From the courtyard, Balthazar stood frozen in horror. He saw her, saw the woman he had doubted, accused, nearly destroyed, walking to the flames of his son in her arms. Time seemed to slow, his heart tearing open at the sight. By the time Amara stumbled into the night air, her hair singed, her clothes streaked with ash, the crowd gasped. Lucian coughed but clung to her, his small fist twisted in her blouse. She sank to her knees, holding him close, too exhausted to speak. Balthazar rushed forward, his knees hitting the gravel beside them. His hand hovered over his son, then over Amara, unsure whom to touch first. His voice cracked. "You saved him. You saved my boy." The wail of sirens pierced the night as firefighters stormed the property. They battled the flames with practiced precision, forcing back the inferno until only blackened ruins of the garage remained. One of the captains approached Balthazar, his expression grim. "Mr. Crane, this wasn't an accident. We found gasoline poured across the floor. And there's something else. Boot prints near the ignition point. They're a match to a pair found in your household. The evidence was undeniable. The boots belonged to Victor Hale." Gasps rippled through the remaining staff. Whispers started, heads turning, realization dawning. Balthazar's jaw clenched as the final veil fell away. The man he had trusted more than any ally had orchestrated every disaster, every humiliation. He turned back to Amara, still kneeling in the dirt with Lucian in her arms. Her face was streaked with tears and soot, her eyes exhausted yet fierce. For once, words failed him. He dropped to both knees beside her, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I was wrong, so wrong, and I owe you everything. Lucian nestled closer into Amara's chest, his breathing finally steady. The fire truck's lights flashed across their faces, red, blue, red again, painting them in a shifting glow. In that moment, as the smoke cleared and the truth lay bare, Balthazar understood the depth of his mistake. He had accused the wrong person, nearly lost the only family he had, and it was a woman he had driven away who had risked everything to keep his son alive. The fire had barely cooled, but Ravenwood Hills was already buzzing with headlines. Newspapers splashed her name across the front page. News anchors on late-night TV repeated it with practiced dramatics. Maid saves billionaire son from raging blaze. Some called Amara a hero, their words carrying awe and gratitude. Others sharpened knives of doubt, digging up photos from her past. Stories twisted to paint her as reckless, dangerous, someone who had no place under the roof of the Crane family. The voices clashed, leaving the city divided, and leaving Balthazar Crane standing in the wreckage of his own certainty. He felt unmoored. Victor, the man he had trusted, was unmasked as a traitor. Amara, the woman he had distrusted, had risked her life for his child. The contradiction haunted him. How could he have been so blind? Still, the specter of his empire loomed over him. If he defended Amara publicly, the board would revolt. Investors already whispered about instability. He knew well how fragile reputations were in the world of money. Inside Redwood Clinic, where Lucian lay recovering, the sterile quiet offered no comfort. Machines hummed, a soft rhythm to the boy's shallow breaths. Balthazar sat across from Amara, who refused to leave the bedside. She looked worn, eyes rimmed red, skin pale beneath the harsh lights, but her presence radiated an unshakable steadiness. Finally, Balthazar broke the silence. His voice was low, as though he were negotiating a deal rather than speaking of lives. "Tell me what you want, Amara. Is it money you're after? Or perhaps a permanent place in my house and my family?" Amara met his gaze, calm but unyielding. "I want Lucian to have a childhood that isn't defined by grief and suspicion. If you can give him that, then I'll step aside. If you can't, then I'll do it myself." The simplicity of her words disarmed him more than any accusation. She wasn't bargaining for status or wealth. She was holding him accountable in a way no one had dared before. Before he could respond, a soft stir came from the bed. Lucian's eyes fluttered open, catching the last line of their exchange. His voice, cracked but fierce, cut through the room. "I don't care about the fortune or the company or the name. I just need her. Don't you get it, Dad? You've never understood." The boy's shout echoed against the sterile walls. The words hit Balthazar like a physical blow, knocking the wind from him. Never had his son raised his voice with such clarity, such defiance. The truth was laid bare. Lucian would choose Amara over him without hesitation. Amara tried to calm him, brushing hair from his damp forehead. "Lucian, save your strength," she whispered. But the boy's hand clutched hers, desperate, unwilling to let go. Balthazar stood there, every instinct colliding, his pride, his fear, his love for his son. He saw his empire teetering on one side, and on the other, the fragile bond of the only family he had left. He wanted both, yet in his heart he knew he might have to sacrifice one to keep the other. The air in the room thickened, silence stretching after Lucian's outburst. Amara held the boy's hand with quiet determination, her eyes steady on Balthazar. She wasn't asking for his approval anymore. She was ready to fight for Lucian with or without it. Unable to bear the weight of their eyes, Balthazar turned and left the room. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, each one heavier than the last. Staff glanced his way, but dared not speak. When he reached the end of the hall, he paused against a cold wall, his breath unsteady. For decades he had lived by one principle: protect the Crane name at all costs. But tonight, standing on the thin edge of choice, he realized that the name might cost him the only thing that still mattered: his son's love. Victor Hale had been escorted out of the police station in the early hours, his expensive shoes clicking against the wet pavement as though he walked free from a minor inconvenience rather than an arson investigation. A skilled lawyer. A few favors called in, and suddenly the walls that had threatened to close around him cracked open just enough for him to slip through. But Victor wasn't finished. If anything, the fire had sharpened his desperation. The Crane name might have momentarily turned against him, but he knew exactly where to strike next. Not at Balthazar directly. Not yet, but at the woman who had unsettled everything. By noon, doctored photos and clipped videos appeared across gossip sites, each piece crafted to turn Amara Holt into a schemer. From waitress to Crane Mansion, calculated climb, one headline sneered. By evening, the whispers grew teeth. She wasn't being painted as a savior anymore, but as a predator who had played the role of hero to secure her place. And then came the press conference. What had been scheduled as a standard Crane Dominion briefing suddenly shifted the moment Victor slipped through the doors. The room was packed with cameras, microphones, and restless reporters eager for blood. Victor strode forward like he still belonged there, clutching a manila folder thick with half-truths. His voice boomed over the hum of chatter. You all think you know the story, but let me show you who Amara Holt really is. The cameras flashed. The crowd erupted. Amara froze, her pulse thudding in her ears. She had been warned Victor might try something, but the sight of her own past being spilled out, one twisted image after another, still knocked the air from her lungs. Faces turned toward her, eyes sharp with judgment, waiting for her to crumble. She wanted to run. The humiliation was suffocating. Every flashbulb a reminder of how little control she had. But before her knees could give, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Enough. The room stilled as Balthazar Crane entered. His presence carried weight, the kind that could quiet a mob without raising his tone. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready, knowing this moment could alter everything. He stepped past Victor, not sparing him a glance, and moved toward the podium. For a beat, he said nothing, just stood there, letting the silence work in his favor. Then he spoke, slow and steady, each word deliberate. Amara Holt saved my son's life, he said. I trust her more than anyone else in my house. If you're looking for someone to crucify, look at me, not at her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed closer. A billionaire, known for his impenetrable composure, had just stripped off his armor in front of the world. Victor's jaw tightened. You're blinded, Balthazar. She's the reason Lucien is alive. Balthazar cut in, his eyes blazing. I will not allow her to be torn apart for the sins of those who betrayed me. The words landed like hammer blows. For years, he had built walls of ice around himself, guarding his empire and reputation. And here, in a single breath, he chose differently. He chose humanity over image, his son over the shareholders, truth over the comfortable lie Victor dangled. The press exploded with questions, shouting over one another, chasing the soundbite that would make the evening news. Balthazar didn't flinch. He simply stepped aside, placing himself, literally, between Amara and the cameras, shielding her from a barrage. Victor stood there, pale, his folder trembling in his grip. This wasn't the Crane he knew, the man who would have sacrificed anyone to protect his empire. Something had shifted, and for once, Victor had no move left play. Amara's chest tightened as tears welled up, hot and uncontrollable. She had expected Balthazar to waver, maybe to stay silent, but never this. The weight of years of suspicion, cruelty, and isolation cracked, and she let herself weep openly, not from shame, but from the startling relief of being defended. Far away in a hospital room, Lucien watched the broadcast. His hands gripped the edge of the bed, his face glowing under the blue light of the television. And then his lips curved upward. A smile, real and unguarded, broke through the grief. After the press conference, the city buzzed like a hive struck by a stone. News anchors dissected every word Balthazar Crane had spoken. Commentators debated whether he had lost his mind, and stock tickers told the cruel story of investors pulling away. Crane Dominion bled contracts, its shares slipping lower with each passing day. Yet inside the gates of Ravenwood, the mansion felt strangely alive. Lucien's laughter, fragile at first, began to find its way back into the echoing halls. Amara coaxed him into board games, read aloud when storms rattled the windows, and wheeled him out to the veranda when the sun dared to show itself. And Balthazar, standing at a distance more often than not, found himself watching something he had nearly forgotten existed. His son smiling, But Amara's heart wasn't at ease. She could feel the eyes of the outside world pressing against the windows, reminding her of the headlines that still painted her as an opportunist. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a hero. She saw a woman dragged into Crane's storm, branded by strangers who knew nothing about her. Some nights, as Lucien slept, she folded her clothes into a bag, whispering to herself that maybe leaving would be an act of mercy for them and for her. Balthazar noticed. One evening, he found her staring at the driveway as though testing how far her feet could carry her. "If you're thinking of running," he said quietly, "don't do it for me, but know this. Without you, Lucien goes dark again, and I'm not sure I can bring him back this time." Amara swallowed hard, torn between guilt and the warmth that flared when he spoke those words. "You don't know what it's like, Mr. Crane, to wake up every day knowing the world's waiting to tear you apart." "I know what it's like to live without meaning," he answered, surprising himself with the honesty. "And you've given my boy something I never could." But while they wrestled with fragile trust inside, Victor Hale stewed in the shadows outside. His arrest hadn't broken him. It had cornered him, and cornered men lash out. He drafted one last play, ruthless and simple. Take the boy, bend the father, and reclaim what he believed was his. The storm rolled in on a Thursday night. Thunder shook the rafters, rain sheeted against the glass, and the household huddled in uneasy rest. When morning broke, Ravenwood awoke to silence in Lucien's room. His bed was empty, the window ajar, the curtains soaked with rain. On the desk lay a slip of paper, jagged letters scrawled in haste. "If you want to see your son again, follow instructions. No police." Amara's knees buckled. "No. God, no." Balthazar's face drained of color as he crushed the note in his fist. There was no boardroom mask, no commanding tone, just a father stripped raw. "He took my boy." Without hesitation, Amara gripped his arm. "Then we take him back." Hours blurred into frantic motion. A gardener swore he'd seen a rusted pickup truck idling near the gates the night before. Another staffer remembered an engine rumbling past the service road after midnight. Piece by piece, a trail formed, pointing toward the edge of town, to a place long abandoned, Ravenhill Mill, the shuttered lumberyard swallowed by weeds and rot. The ride, there was quiet except for the pounding rain on the windshield. Balthazar gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles whitened, while Amara stared out at the blur of pine trees, rehearsing every possible outcome, her chest aching at the thought of Lucien terrified and alone. When they pulled up, the mill loomed like a carcass of iron and timber, windows gaping like broken teeth. The air was damp, heavy with mildew. They crept inside, each footstep cracking on warped boards. And then they heard it, a faint metallic scrape, the sound of something being dragged. Amara froze, her breath caught in her throat. She knew that sound, the wheels of Lucien's chair scraping against rough concrete. She turned to Balthazar, eyes burning with resolve. This end tonight. The lumber mill groaned under the weight of years, every rusted beam and warped plank whispering of neglect. Flashlight beams carved through the darkness, slicing across old saws and conveyor belts left to rot. And then the light caught him, Victor Hale. His hand clamped firmly on Lucien's shoulder, his face a mask twisted by rage, the years of bitterness etched into every line. "You see this, Balthazar?" Victor's voice carried through the cavernous hall, sharp and brittle. "I gave my life to your family. I cleaned up your messes, fought your battles, kept your empire afloat. And now some poor black girl earns more trust in a month than I ever did in decades. Tell me, where's the justice in that?" Lucien shuddered beneath Victor's grip, his small hands clutching the arms of his chair. Amara stepped forward, her pulse hammering, but Balthazar raised a hand to stop her. "I was blind," Balthazar admitted, his tone low but steady. "Blind to your ambition, blind to her courage, blind to what truly mattered. You wanted my recognition, Victor, but you never understood. Hatred doesn't crown you king. It makes you nothing but a prisoner." Victor laughed, though it was closer to a snarl. "Spare me your sermons. I should have been more than your shadow. But since you won't hand me the legacy, I'll take it by force." With a violent yank, he dragged Lucien toward the rotting platform edge. Below yawned the black pit, where the old saws once spun. The wood groaned, splinters cracking under their weight. Amara cried out, her voice echoing. "Don't! He's just a child. Your war is with me. Victor, leave him out of this." Victor's eyes gleamed, wild with obsession. "You think you're untouchable because you played hero twice? You're nothing but a pawn, and pawns get sacrificed." The words tore through her like glass, but her body moved before fear could freeze her. She hurled herself forward just as the platform shuddered. Victor's attention flickered. Just a second, but enough. Amara wrapped her arms around Lucien, pulling him tight against her chest. Together they tumbled sideways, rolling across the rotten boards. The edge crumbled inches from where they landed, the hollow below swallowing splinters instead of flesh. Lucien gasped, clinging to her neck. "Amara, I've got you," she whispered hoarsely, chest burning from the fall. "I've got you, sweetheart. I won't let go." The sound of footsteps thundered across the platform. Balthazar surged forward, his frame colliding with Victor's. The two men crashed to the ground, years of partnership collapsing into fists and fury. Balthazar didn't fight as a businessman, but as a father. His voice shook with rage as he forced Victor's arm behind his back. "You betrayed everything," Balthazar hissed. "You betrayed my son." Victor twisted, spitting out words like venom. "And you'll lose it all, Balthazar. Your fortune, your name, your empire, it'll all burn." But then came the beam of flashlights, the bark of orders. "Police, don't move." Officers stormed into mill, boots striking against concrete. In seconds, Victor's wrists were locked in cuffs. His furious cries ricocheting through the cavern. "You think you've won. This isn't over. You'll drown in the wreckage of your own empire." The echoes faded with a shuffle of boots and clatter of chains. And suddenly, silence wrapped around the three left behind. Amara sat on the cold floor. Lucien still held her chest, his small body trembling but safe. Her hair clung to her damp cheeks. Her lungs fought for air, but she refused to loosen her embrace. Balthazar staggered toward them, his knees hitting the floor beside her. His hand shook as he reached out, hesitating before it landed gently on her shoulder. His eyes, those once shielded by pride and suspicion, were raw now, unguarded. "You saved him," he murmured, voice breaking. "You saved both of us. Not once, not twice, but over and over." Amara met his gaze, her breath ragged, her arms still wrapped tight around Lucien. She didn't answer with words. The weight of the moment spoke louder than anything she could say. The morning after Victor's arrest, Ravenwood Hills hummed with a new kind of noise. The same papers and channels that once feasted on scandal now rushed to rewrite their headlines. Trusted advisor exposed. One banner read. Another, with a photograph of Amara clutching Lucien outside the burning estate, called her the Maid who saved the Crane legacy. For once, she was not the villain in their story. The police held a press conference, cameras flashing in every direction. Boxes of files were rolled into evidence. An officer explained in calm detail that Victor Hale had embezzled funds for years, manipulated stock, and even staged dangerous accidents, including the fires that nearly claimed Lucien's life. It wasn't gossip anymore. It was fact, laid bare under harsh lights. At Crane Dominion, the shareholders, once restless and sharp of blame, now breathed easier. The enemy had a face, and it wasn't the woman they had been so eager to scorn. "It's like cutting out a tumor," one director murmured during the meeting. The company's stock price ticked upward in cautious recovery, but inside the halls of Ravenwood, the change was more than financial. That evening, Balthazar Crane stood in the quiet hospital room where his son rested. Lucien was thinner than he remembered, pale against the white sheets, but his eyes followed every movement his father made. Balthazar did not arrive with silence or distant nods. He sat at the edge of the bed, his voice catching on words he wasn't used to saying. "Lucien," he began, and his throat tightened, "I owe you an apology. I let my pride and my business blind me. While I chased shadows, you carried loneliness I should have spared you. I am sorry, son, for every night you felt abandoned." Lucien's lips trembled. He pressed his small hands together, gathering courage, then whispered, "I don't care about the empire, Father. I don't need all this wealth. I just wanted a family, even if it's small, even if it's imperfect. I just wanted someone to stay." The words landed heavy in the room, heavier than any financial report or market loss. Balthazar bowed his head, as though the weight of his son's truth had finally cracked through the armor he wore for decades. Amara, standing quietly by the window, listened with her heart in her throat. She had expected her place to end here, that once the storm calmed, the walls of class and suspicion would close again. The papers might call her a savior, but she still carried scars of what people whispered. Opportunist, climber, an outsider with no place in a house like this. Later that night, after Lucian had drifted into an easier sleep, Amara stepped out into the dimly lit corridor. Balthazar followed, the weight of unspoken questions between them. She turned, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. "I don't know if I belong here," she admitted softly. "The world may sing praises today, but tomorrow they'll remember my past. I'm no heroine, Mr. Crane. I just couldn't let that boy suffer alone. I don't think I could ever walk away from him, but staying—" She shook her head. "I don't know if I'm worthy of it." For a long moment, Balthazar said nothing. His face was unreadable, though the usual hardness in his eyes had eased into something quieter, almost fragile. He looked at her, really looked, as if seeing not the maid, not the rumor, but the woman who had thrown herself into fire and shadow for his child. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand. It was a simple gesture, no speech, no grand promises, just the warm weight of his palm resting over hers. It was heavy with meaning, a silent confession of trust and acknowledgement, something words might cheapen. Spring returned to Ravenwood Hills with a gentleness no one in the old stone house had felt in years. The estate that once seemed haunted by silence now echoed with the sound of Lucian's laughter, the squeak of his practice frame rolling across the polished floors, and the warm cadence of voices filling rooms that had long been hollow. Every morning, Amara was there by his side. One step, then another, she encouraged, her hand steady on his shoulder as Lucian leaned into the walker. His legs trembled, his breath quickened, but determination burned in his eyes. Each shuffle across the rug was celebrated. Each stumble met with patience instead of scolding. "You see," she whispered one afternoon as he reached the end of the hallway, "hope is just a collection of little steps." Lucian grinned, sweat on his forehead, but pride radiating from him like sunlight. He didn't feel like a burden. He felt alive, seen, and capable. Balthazar Crane watched from the doorway, leaning on the frame with arms crossed. The sharp businessman who once measured worth only in numbers was softening into something else. He was still awkward in these tender moments, but he tried. He came to the dinner table each evening. Setting his phone aside, he asked Lucian about his day. Sometimes his questions came out stiff, but his smile, still rare, still slightly crooked, was real, and Lucian glowed under it. Amara noticed a change in him most in the small things. The way he now sat in the living room instead of his office late at night. The way his voice lost its bite when he addressed the staff. The way he lingered at the table long after meals ended, listening instead of dismissing. He had discovered that leadership at home required the same attention as leadership in boardrooms, only more costly if ignored. For Amara, the journey was humbling. The world outside still held its opinions. There were still whispers in town, articles that lingered online. But inside these walls, she was no longer just the maid. She was caretaker, mentor, confidant. She had become the warmth that bound father and son together. One breezy afternoon, Amara knelt beside Lucian as he rested from practice. His chest rose and fell with tired breaths, and she brushed damp hair from his forehead. Her voice was low, meant only for him. "Every scar can heal," she murmured. "Every wound has a chance if we let it." Lucian nodded, clutching her hand. "I believe you," he said, and she knew he meant more than his legs. He meant his heart, his life, his trust in family again. Balthazar, standing behind them, caught her words. Something flickered in his expression, something that spoke of gratitude he couldn't yet put into sentences. Instead, he simply rested a hand on her shoulder for a brief second, as though grounding himself in her presence. But life, even in its healing, leaves questions lingering. One quiet evening, Amara returned to her small room and found an envelope slipped beneath the door. She recognized the seal immediately. It was from a nursing program she had left behind years ago. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, an invitation, the chance to return and complete her training. She sat on the bed, reading it twice, then a third time. A smile touched her lips, but her eyes lifted instinctively toward the sound of Lucien's laughter echoing from down the hall, followed by Balthazar's deeper chuckle. She pressed the letter to her chest. Caught between the path she had once dreamed of and the life she had stumbled into, one built not on ambition but on love. Later, as the sun dropped behind the rolling hills, the three of them stood together on the wide stone balcony. The air was crisp with the scent of fresh grass, and the sky burned in shades of gold and rose. Lucien leaned lightly against Amara, her arm steady around him, while Balthazar stood close enough for the space between them to feel deliberate, chosen. The wind carried away the memory of smoke and ashes, sweeping through the cracks of the old house as though cleansing it. Ravenwood did not feel like a fortress. It felt like a home. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The warmth of spring, the closeness of three people who had chosen to remain, said everything. And though a letter waited in Amara's drawer, heavy with possibility, tonight she let it rest. Tonight, the choice was simply to stand together, to breathe, to belong. The horizon stretched open before them, a promise of beginnings, not dictated by bloodline or wealth, but by the fragile, stubborn act of staying. In the end, maybe the heart of this story is simpler than we think. Family isn't just the one you're born into, but the one you choose to stand beside when storms come. Forgiveness, trust, and the courage to stay can rebuild even the most broken of homes. What about you? Do you believe love and loyalty can matter more than blood or wealth? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story we'll bring to life.